So first I wanted to say thanks so much for the opportunity to present my research, and also thanks for bringing up the IDP and actually allowing people to discuss this, because I think a lot of times in war we focus on the combatants, we focus on the governments, but we don't really focus on the people who are actually affected by the crisis. And so I'm very thankful to be able to hopefully give a little bit of voice to those people, because often in conflicts, those are the least recognized people, but the people that are mostly affected by the crisis. So the severe humanitarian crisis in Ukraine has left nearly 8,000 people dead, displaced 1.5 million officially, people on the ground estimated to be about 4 or 5 million, and then uprooted another 1.4 million people that have actually left the country. One of the most significant consequences of the conflict is this humanitarian crisis and the emergence of internally displaced persons. So even though this panel is titled Refugees, we will be focusing on internally displaced persons, and I'll give you a definition of what the difference is between the two, because many people in Ukraine get very frustrated when you say refugees, because they are not refugees, they're internally displaced people. So my paper examines the Ukrainian IDP crisis and the Ukrainian government response to this type of internal forced migration. While most of the humanitarian crisis has been recognized that the international community has done it, I'm focusing a bit more on what the Ukrainian government has done and the type of response that they have to the crisis. So my two research questions are, what are the characteristics of internal forced migration in Ukraine? Because every type of forced migration is different, and so I wanted to look at the characteristics of the forced migration in Ukraine. And then I also wanted to know, what has the Ukrainian government actually done to respond to the crisis? Because when I was in Ukraine this summer speaking with people, a lot of people had not very nice things to say about the government, and so I wanted to actually find out if the government was doing anything and what they were doing. And also in talking with people, I discovered, the international response to the crisis and also the local NGO response to the crisis. So I'll be looking at all three caveats. And then I'm also going to compare the Ukrainian government crisis to other governments that have also faced similar displaced people crises, because it puts the Ukrainian government, I think, in a better light than most people in Ukraine view it. So my methods. So in order to evaluate the humanitarian crisis, I spent July and August of 2015 in Ukraine conducting participant observation, interviews, and looking at newspaper articles. So these are a couple of the pictures from my fieldwork. I visited IDP collective centers, humanitarian crisis cluster group meetings, a number of press conferences, and then I did interviews with stakeholders and visited some archives as well. So this picture shows a press conference at the International Organization for Migration, which is one of the big international organizations that works with IDPs. And then this one on the left is the gender-based violence cluster group meeting, and I'll explain what all of that is in a second. But I just wanted to show some of my photos. I'll tell you too. So most of these photos are mine, and if they're not, I'll make sure I recognize that they're not mine. So even though this panel is titled Refugees, we will be talking about internally displaced people. And so what's the difference? With migration research, is really important to be able to define the communities that you're talking about, because there's a lot of political connotations, as we've seen with the refugee/migrant crisis in Europe. It's really important to define those. So according to the Ukrainian government law, which is the law on ensuring the rights and freedoms of displaced people, the Ukrainian government defines displaced people as such persons. The person has to be a citizen of Ukraine, permanently residing in Ukraine, that was forced or voluntarily left their place of residence. So internally displaced people differ from refugees in that they're displaced within their own country. Internally displaced people don't cross an international boundary, they just leave from one area of the country to the next. Refugees, on the other hand, cross an international border, and once they enter the country that they're displaced from, they claim asylum or apply for refugee status for the most part. So it's important to recognize that refugees are actually recognized under international law. They have protections under international law. There's a mandate with the United Nations High Commissioner for the Refugees that works with those refugees, but IDPs don't have any of that backing behind them because they're internally displaced people, so they're displaced within their own country, and so it's the government of their country that's actually tasked with responding to them. Whereas with refugees, we've seen a lot of the international organizations come and help those people, but displaced persons are not recognized in international law, and they don't have any type of assistance that that is required by international law to be provided to them. So IDPs and refugees are very, very different entities. So I wanted to show, so this is the map of displacement from the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. So you can see the displacement. Okay, so you can see the displacement from the area, let's see, up there, from the area of the conflict, and most of the displacement is centered around the 4 to 5 regions surrounding the conflict, and then you can see as we move further west, there are fewer IDPs. So the darker the color on the map, the more proportion IDPs are located in that region. So you can kind of see the progression. Western Ukraine has much fewer IDPs than Kharkiv and Dnipropetrovsk, Kherson, and places bordering the conflict and displacement areas. And then I also want to point out, so the circles, if you see the large gray circles and the white circles, so those are people that are refugees or people that are displaced from Ukraine. So while internally we can see those are the numbers of, and I should also say, these are the numbers of registered. So we'll talk about the registration problems a bit that they've had in Ukraine, but these are just the official numbers. So these are only the people that have registered, which is why the number is 1.5 million, but most people on the ground estimate it to be around 4 or 5 million people. So you can see, so the circles on, neighboring Russian Federation, Moldova, the white circle, the small circle is the number of people that have claimed asylum. So those are people that are actually officially applying for refugee status, and then the larger circle are people that have, gone to that country but are not officially registered or officially applying for asylum status. So when we're talking about refugees, we're talking about the small circles. When we're talking about IDPs, we're talking about the people in Ukraine. So hopefully that difference is clear. So official numbers reflect the number of people who registered their move with the Ukrainian government. So these official numbers underestimate the number of people displaced because many people don't register for fear of military conscription. That's when I went to some of the collective centers to speak with people, that was one of the biggest deterrents from registering, was that people didn't want to register because they didn't want to go fight in the war. And they're also, so if you're fleeing, your home, you might not remember to grab your passport and all of the paperwork that shows your registration. So a lot of people aren't able to register because of paperwork issues. And anyone who knows the registration process in Ukraine knows that you need lots of stamps and paperwork to be able to show your place of residence. So the lack of paperwork is also a huge reason why people do not register. There's also a lot of Roma people in the population that have been displaced that also, because they don't have the proper paperwork, have not been able to register. And people don't want to pay taxes, so they don't register. So there are lots of reasons why people don't register. So when you look at these numbers and see the it's 1.4, but now it's up to 1.5 million people, that's only the official registered numbers. And that is from the Ministry of Social Policy, which is the entity in the Ukrainian government that does the registration. So, which is why people on the ground estimate the number of displaced people to be so much higher than it actually is showing us. Okay, so the government response, I divided it into 4 categories. The first is financial assistance. So the government of Ukraine has provided about 800,000 IDPs with 800 hryvnia a month to assist them with their displacement. That's about $40 a month, so it's not that much money. And that 800 hryvnia only goes to disabled people, pensioners, single mothers, and large families. So working age people are given 400 hryvnias a month, which is about $20. Oh, 2 minutes. Wow, I better hurry up. Okay. So financial assistance. The Ukrainian government has provided financial assistance. Housing is the next. Is actually probably the most important issue and problem faced by IDPs. When you flee, your home, it's very difficult to be able to find housing in a new area. So housing and collective centers has been provided by a number of different entities. This is a picture of one of the collective centers that I visited. This collective center held 47 adults and 34 kids, and that painting was actually painted by one of the 34 children that live in that center. So I also wanted to show you the inside. So I will tell you this collective center where they actually allowed me to take photos is not representative of all the collective centers. This is probably the nicest collective center. If we weren't being videotaped, I would tell you where it is, but since this is for the wider public, I don't want to out IDPs. So, but yeah, you can see it's actually a pretty nice place, which is probably why they allowed me to take photos there and not other collective centers. So yeah, collective centers have been in kindergartens, dormitories, sanatoriums. A lot of these places weren't equipped for winter months. So while this place looks very nice, a lot of these places are summer entities, and yeah, with the Ukrainian winter and summer, it's not a very nice place to be. Okay, so quickly, so registration issues. So there have been a lot of registration issues. A lot of people don't have the adequate paperwork to file social assistance claims. So registration has been a huge problem. They established a unified registration system, the Ukrainian government did, but they passed the legislation so quickly that they didn't actually think through a lot of the proposals. So it's created a significant amount of problems with the registration system. So even though now they have a unified registration system, which is great, that means that you only have to register once and you're able to register your location and get social assistance. So you can go to the hospital and things like that. And then the last, are you going to come in?
Just to sum up here,
okay.
1 minute.
Okay, so then the last is the legal frameworks. Well, that 10 minutes went by really fast. The last is the legal frameworks. And so, so basically the Ukrainian government has passed a lot of laws. These laws aren't very thought out. They often contradict each other and have lots of problems. One of the laws, the biggest law on ensuring the rights and freedoms of internally displaced people, actually ended up disenfranchising almost every single IDP. They aren't actually able to vote in the election tomorrow. And so these photos, these are not my photos. This is a photo exhibition from the Ukrainian Pravda, and it's titled Reluctantly Voiceless, and it tells you where the people are from, and they cannot vote in the election tomorrow, which is a big deal that no one seems to be talking about. We can talk more about the international response and the local NGO response in others. So these are some more photos, and so these are my key findings.
Thank you, Laura.